The ability to fine-tune your selection really is key. This is probably the most important selection technique, other than the tools themselves, that will make your life easier when you're making selections. Earlier we talked about the idea of starting with a tool like the quick selection tool or the magnetic lasso tool because it's fairly quick, but sometimes, like in this case, it'll select a little too much and we need to fix it up a little bit. So anytime we need to add to an existing selection, you will hold down the Shift key and it will add to it. Now the quick selection tool, by the way, is the one exception to this rule, in that by default, let me start again, by default the quick selection tool, every time I stop, it assumes I want to add to my existing selection. Let me show you the difference for a moment just so you understand with this. If I use a lasso tool selection and then want to continue it, Photoshop actually assumes that you're not continuing, you're starting a new one. So every time I click, it's deselecting the first one. So the difference is this: if I make a selection and want to add to it, I hold down this Shift key. Now watch the lasso tool. See that little tiny plus sign? That's telling me I'm now adding to my selection. So as long as I do little loops around to keep adding to it, I can keep adding the parts that I miss. If I want to take away from my selection, Option or Alt will put a little minus sign. So I'm holding down the Option or Alt key. Rather than deselecting the complete selection, now it's letting me fine-tune it. Once again, see how I'm looping up far enough around? And what I mean by that is, let's say I wanted to get rid of this top portion. If I just went like this and went across and stopped, it wouldn't work properly. I need to go far enough around to tell it that's the part I want to get rid of. A lot of people make the mistake of kind of going like this and thinking, there we go, and that just cuts a big hole in it. So let's put that into a practical sense now. Let's go back to the quick selection tool. Drag and drop really quickly. I keep saying drag and drop. Drag really quickly. And what's happening is it's selecting a little too much. So I'd hold down the Option or Alt key to remove from this. But even there might be areas where it didn't quite work. So I would zoom into those areas, switch to my lasso tool, and this goes back to our discussion of ending up with a good selection. I don't want that part selected, so I hold down the Option or Alt key, remove that from the selection, just make sure I loop around it. And the same thing here. I want to come along the edge of her shoe, and this is an example of something about looping around, go back around to the point where I can get the part that I want. Same thing up here. I want to go along here, and I usually just do little pieces at a time to make sure I don't try and do too much. This needs to be out of the picture, so does this around this edge. Loop around, come down here. Now when you're zoomed in close, sometimes part of the trick is figuring out which do I want to hold down, Option or Alt or the Shift key, and it will depend, of course, on the situation. Here I can see I need to add a little bit, so I'll hold down the Shift key to add this little extra part. Switch back to Option or Alt to remove that little piece. So you can see how quick this is to work. It's just a matter of switching back and forth. I need to hold down the Shift key to add this part down here. If this was a real project, at a certain point, I would press Q for Quick Mask to see how I'm doing, and then continue working on it. Let me deselect this, zoom back out again a little bit, and compare this concept with the concept of the magnetic lasso tool. So as we saw before, the magnetic lasso tool will often do a pretty good start. I'm just going to cut to the chase here and go around this area. Again, fairly quickly. If the magnetic lasso tool doesn't get an area like this, don't try to fix it with the magnetic lasso tool. Because if I hold on the Shift key and try to add to the selection, the chances are, as you can see there, it's still just doing the same thing. So that's where I would switch back to the regular lasso tool, hold down the Shift key, and manually add in the part that it didn't get. And I'd go through and do that any place that I want to. Even in a case like this, where now I decide I want the rest of it, I can still keep adding pieces using this concept. So that's one first example, is fine-tuning using Shift to add to the selection, Option or Alt to take away from the selection. The other possibility is with tools like the rectangular and elliptical marquee tool. So I want to try and select this Texas Rangers badge. Well, honestly, I don't have any idea where to start dragging with the elliptical marquee tool to kind of make it match up. But honestly, it doesn't matter, because as long as I have some kind of oval selection, The other way I can fine-tune a selection is by using this command called transform selection. Now, if you're familiar with free transform, this is the same idea, but for selection. So I can take the handles of this tool and drag it to try and make it fit. Now, often what will happen, like in this case, it wasn't taken straight on, so it's not really a perfect circle. Well, if I hold down the Command or Control key and click on one of these corner handles, you'll see how it'll let me tweak just that side of it. So in a couple of quick steps, that looks pretty good to me. I think I'll pull this up just a hair. Hit Enter, Q for Quick Mask. Looks pretty darn good, and it's allowed me to fine-tune that selection. So transform selection is a really useful way in a case like this, but now what about these areas in here? I want to remove them from the selection as well. Well, I could try, I suppose, the Quick Selection tool with Option or Alt held down. I should actually click on the Quick Selection tool, though, when I say that, and then see if that actually might work. Looks like it might. Let's just try it and see. Looks pretty good there. Missed a tiny bit there, but I can get that. Okay, so all I have to do in this case is go to my polygonal lasso tool with Option or Alt held down and get rid of that last little piece. So you can see it's often a combination of just using the tools in conjunction with each other to give you the results you want. Now, often the true test of whether something's worked or not is to do something with your selection, because of course it looks pretty good right now even in Quick Mask, but let's actually put it on its own layer. Command or Control J, put it on a layer by itself, hide the rest. It looks pretty good. Let's put a layer below. I'm going to Command or Control click on this and we'll fill it with some color. Still looks pretty good. Just to take it a step further, let's try taking this, not that this would make any sense to do this, of course, but bring it over here and put it on there. You can see it still looks pretty decent, so we made a pretty good selection. So again, a couple different tools using our fine-tuning methods to end up with a good selection that looks pretty realistic.